Hey, welcome back if you were in the last session with Les, and welcome newly to all of you who were not in the last session with Les. And some of you might not have been, so for that reason, I'm going to run over his bio again. Les is Les Zaitz is an Oregon native and a longtime journalist and reporter for the Oregonian, and he did a lot of investigative journalism during his career, more than most of us will ever do. He worked at the Oregonian from 76 to 87. In 87, he left and became the owner and publisher of the Kaiser Times, which is a newspaper in Oregon. His family still owns that paper, and it consistently wins journalism awards. After returning to the Oregonian in 2000, he served as a senior investigative reporter and editor. Les won in 2007 as part of a team, the prestigious National George Polk Award, and was a finalist for the Pulitzer. He's also been was a finalist for the Pulitzer in 2014. He's a 5-time solo winner of Oregon's Bruce Baer Award, which is the top award for investigative journalism in that state. And the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association in 2016 awarded him its highest honor for career achievement, an award they had not given since 2010. So Les retired supposedly in 2016, and then he returned to community journalism as the editor and publisher of the weekly Malheur Enterprise, which is in Vail, the town of Vail, Oregon. His family's purchase of the Enterprise rescued it from closure, which is something he's going to talk to us about today. And he believes that investigative reporting should be the focus of the newspaper's work. And because of that, the Enterprise has won state, regional, and national journalism awards. In his spare time in 2018, Les co-founded the Salem Reporter, a digital news service based in Oregon's capital. The service has formed a collaboration with 2 other Oregon news organizations to create the Oregon Capitol Bureau, which focuses on state government reporting. Les leads the team of 4 reporters as its editor. Les lives on a remote ranch in Grant County with his wife, where they run a small horse-cow operation. I'm turning it over to you, Les.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. All right, good afternoon. And I'm hoping the next hour will be invigorating for all of you. And I hope to leave you sort of encouraged to go back to your newsrooms and news organizations and tackle some terrific journalism. There's a lot that needs to be done out there, and nobody can do it but you. The Malheur Enterprise is a small weekly in the eastern edge of Oregon, literally another time zone from the rest of the state. I operate most of the time with 2 reporters, so I don't have a robust, fat staff. Our county is huge. There are 9 states that are smaller in geographic size than Oregon. We have a number of cities and school boards and water districts that we supposedly have to cover. So it's a fairly challenging news environment in an area that's pretty impoverished. And I understand the realities of today's journalism and news organizations, as you do. I mean, none of us have enough reporters. We don't have enough editors. We don't have enough money. People don't trust us. People think we're making up the news. There are days, frankly, where probably a lot of us go home and we are not patting ourselves on the back and saying, boy, that was a great day of journalism. It's easy to get dispirited in today's environment. And so why should your organizations continue to pursue investigative or enterprise reporting, or even start doing it? Well, it's your job. It's your duty. It's your obligation to your community. And you're supposed to be the watchdog over the public treasury, over the use of public power, over accountability for large organizations that maybe dominate the economy in your area. You're the one people expect to watch out to see that their interests, not the corporate interests, not the public interests, not the political interests, come first. You're supposed to be the ones that right the wrong and protect the weak and shine that light on the dark corners where people don't want anyone to know what's going on. And frankly, investigative reporting is good business. It's a good thing to do for pure financial reasons. And we'll talk about that in the next hour or so. But how can you do this? I mean, I coach and mentor newsrooms around the country, and it's a frustration I encounter regularly from people say, well, in today's environment, we've had to cut our staff, we've got to cover all of these things. How in the world can we possibly do enterprise investigative reporting? And too many people, I think, consider investigative reporting sort of an all or nothing proposition. Well, I can't designate someone full-time to do investigative reporting. I can't detach an education reporter for 6 months to dig into school test scores. If you come at investigative reporting in the management of your organizations from that paradigm, you're right, you will not do investigative reporting. You have already handcuffed yourself to the rail in the hallway and you're not going anywhere, and investigative reporting will pass you by. But you can do something, and it's about having the mindset and instilling the mindset in your news organization that this type of reporting is foundational to what you do to serve your community. It all starts with what's going on in your head and the heads of the people that work under you in your newsrooms. And there are ways that you can change that paradigm. We'll talk about that a little bit. You know, I say that we don't have to do this all or nothing. You know, I don't have any full-time investigative reporters. When I was at the Oregonian, sure, as the investigations editor, I had a team of 6. Well, today, there's half that number of investigative reporters. Even at a large metro daily like the Oregonian, there are just fewer people available to do the work. My encouragement to those who don't do any investigative reporting, or very little, is to start with incremental steps. And by that, I mean, what I ask my reporters to do is, okay, so we can't do a full-blown investigative story, but in every story, virtually every story we do, can we add an element? Can we add an element of investigative or enterprise reporting? 3 or 4 paragraphs that tell the reader, well, you know, we're going to tell you about this new sewer contract, and we went and requested the bids for this sewer contract, and there were only 5 people, and this is not the lowest bid. Excuse me. Well, okay, so I think the reader would find that interesting that the city council or your county court handed out a $1 million contract when they could have gotten the work done for $750,000. Just having elements of enterprise in stories does a couple of things for you. Think about if you did that just 5 times a week. Just 5 stories had 4 or 5 paragraphs of something that goes beyond just the rote reporting of a government agency. Well, at the end of that week, think how much more information you have provided your readers and how much you sort of primed the pump and started to build their appetite for that sort of information, and to have them recognize that you have the interest in providing that sort of information. That doesn't take a full-time reporter. That doesn't take an extraordinary amount of extra reporting time. It takes a mindset. You know, when the Pulitzers come out and the other national awards, you know, the Scripps Howard Awards come out for investigative projects, very often what you're seeing are massive projects that took enormous resources to pull off. And they document some incredible scandals and whatever. I think most of you probably recognize that genuine scandal, genuinely really, you know, eye-popping investigative stories do not develop every single day in our communities. We have to set a more reasonable bar. We have to not be focused on the model set by the New York Times or ProPublica. We have to set the standard by what are we going to add to our news mix that we're not giving readers now that will help them find out the truth about what's going on in their community. And I think the surest way to start is to have your newsrooms right on the wall, on a whiteboard, on their desk, the simple question, why? Why did something happen? that is so often overlooked, and that's sort of the enterprise investigative element that could be added to just about any story, right? We very often report about what happens. The school board cut the budget for band, and we report diligently that they're laying off the band teacher, and 57 kids no longer get to play their clarinets. Why did that get cut? Well, the school district says, well, we just don't have the money. Is that true? Do we ask? Pursue that question and answer it for your readers. In other words, explain the why. And again, it doesn't have to be an elaborate multi-day project. It can simply be asking the question and expecting a diligent answer. Why did this street get repaved when there's a worse street over there? I mean, sometimes these are elements that are just right in front of you. I'll give you an example just out of my own community. I came into town. It's a city of 1,500-1,600 people with a major highway going through it. And I noticed they were tearing up street corners. And it looked like what they were doing is putting in new curb cuts, for handicap accessibility. But that puzzled me because what they were tearing out already had curb cuts. And so I went to the newsroom and I got the two reporters. I said, let's take a little field trip. And I went down to an intersection where there was an existing curb cut and one that was getting torn out and a new one. I said, look at these intersections, look at these corners. What's the difference between these? And they looked, well, nothing. I said, well, that's kind of what I thought. So here's the question. Why are they tearing up what appear to be perfectly suitable, accessible handicap ramps to put in new accessible handicap ramps that look like carbon copies? Well, we started asking the state transportation department. Now, if there was a reasonable, easy answer, the transportation department should have been able to tell us, well, we have to replace them for 1, 2, 3 reasons. It has been 3 weeks now since we've asked for documentation about these corners, and we've yet to get it. And I'll tell you from my investigative experience, when you see that sort of a delay to answer what ought to be a fairly easy question to address, something's going on. And we don't know yet, but it's a question of why. Why are they replacing these curb cuts? Another example, just recently in the Mount Airy Enterprise, and you can read it online if you're interested. The county was supposed to be getting $4,000 to $5,000 a month payments from the state for participation in a major economic development project. And we asked, well, how are those payments going? Well, we only got 3 payments and they stopped. What's the question? Why? Why did they stop? Long story short, the economic development director is actually a state legislator who runs economic development as a private contracting business with the county. He gets paid $6,000 a month for part-time work. His entire invoice to the county each month is project service management. If you look at state and local contracting laws, he's supposed to submit, to get that state money reimbursed, invoices that account for hours, the rates of pay, the expenses. What turns out is this guy's taking in $6,000 a month and doesn't want to be accountable to the public or even to the county for what he's doing for that money. And I can tell you, our readers really appreciated that we're digging into that. But that all became a story because we asked the question, why? So how does this work? In a small newsroom, or any newsroom for that matter. I mean, I've got 2 reporters again who are covering all manner of news and sports and COVID and the other breaking news. It's not like they've got a lot of spare time. There is no other way to do this unless you manage the key resource you have to control, and that is time. You have to spend the hours as carefully as you spend the money in deciding that you're going to dedicate some resource, some element of resource to investigative and enterprise reporting. It's the old cost benefit analysis, opportunity cost. We're going to do this instead of this, because I know you don't have the ability to go out and hire another reporter to do investigative reporting, although we'll put an asterisk on that. We'll talk about how that might be possible. But generally, you have this pool of hours to spend in your newsroom, and it's up to you and your leadership team and your reporters how to use those hours and use those hours to the most impact. And the key is to get organized. If you're going to do an enterprise project, if you want to dig into why are minority students in our local school system so far behind in test scores, you just can't start reporting and willy-nilly go out and gather information. You have to, for it to be effective, for you to get a result, to get a story that's done and published, you have to organize. You have to organize carefully, talking out what's the potential story, why are we doing this, what's the impact? I mean, again, you have precious resources. You don't want to spend a lot of time doing a story that will affect 4 people. You want to do a story that will affect 40 people or 400 people or 4,000 people. So you have to assess the impact of what it is. And then you have to assess, well, okay, what are the key people we need to talk to? What are the key reports or documents we think we'll need? In other words, it's presenting a battle plan to go after an enterprise or investigative project. Because what this does is it builds in discipline to think about, why are we doing this at all? Number one. What's the key question we're trying to answer? Why a test score so bad for Latino students compared to white students? And is it likely we're going to be able to get to the answer and it will have an impact? Well, if you're going to do a story that affects every family in your school district, because you're going to question how your school system is serving minority students, that's a story with impact. That's going to be a story read by students, by their parents, by educators, and by leaders in the community. And the way to do this is, again, I don't have the time to tell a reporter, okay, take 2 days to go do reporting. Well, they've got to go shoot a softball game. They've got yet another city council scandal to report on. It is all about breaking a project down into elements and pieces and doing it one step at a time. It's like any other project. If you stop and think about everything it takes to build a house, you would never pick up the hammer. But if you think, well, today I'm just going to frame one 10-foot wall of 2x4s, I'm just going to pound in the 16 penny nails and put the studs in, and that's my goal for today, that seems pretty manageable. Well, investigative reporting is no different. I ask my reporters, okay, put together the list of things that need to be done, put them in priority order, and then when you get a spare 15 minutes, pick just one and drive it to the done column. Just one. Don't try to do 20 things, because if you try to do 20 things, you won't do anything. So it is empowering people to realize that this can be done if they manage their time a little bit. And sometimes I'll tell a reporter, okay, I want you to block out 2 hours Thursday afternoon, and I want you to do nothing but work on that economic development project. Because you all know, I mean, as skilled as we are as journalists to be multitasking, when you're doing enterprise work, to bounce in and out is a challenge in any event. And so if a reporter can get a couple of hours to be able to focus to the exclusion of everything else, the progress starts picking up, the pace starts picking up towards getting that story done and ready for publication. Now, it's a zero-sum game. Again, you have only so many hours on your news team. You're not going to start authorizing, 30 hours of overtime every week to add in enterprise. Something has to give. And that's where you, as newsroom leaders, have to make some real strategic choices about this and not this. And I'll tell you what I did in my news organization, and it's fairly controversial, frankly, in a lot of journalism circles. I told my staff, on a regular, as a matter of routine, we're not going to school board meetings. We're not going to the city council meeting. And I'll tell you why. Because God knows I've covered a lot of them in my time as a reporter. And that poor reporter goes to a school board meeting and sits there for 3 hours. and there's one topic that comes up that is of any interest to us in the news business, let alone the readers. And so I've smoked 3 hours of precious reporting time, having someone sit there on a hard seat, half awake, watching the school board go through agenda item 12G, 12F, 12K. No, we're not going to do that. I'm going to take that 3 hours. Instead of being in a school board meeting, I want you to spend that 3 hours learning about test scores for minority students. Now, do we sometimes miss major developments? Yes. But think about it this way. Very little happens at public agency board meetings that is not scripted, i.e. there's an agenda, so there should be no surprise about what the topic is, number one. Number two, there's all the agenda material, staff reports that are just stacked up in 3-ring binders. So our reporters have the background without having to suffer through someone reading the report at a meeting. And number three, and this is probably the most important thing, and I use this as a tool in my newsrooms all the time. I tell them, if we have to go to a meeting to learn about a major development, what that tells me is that we're not well sourced enough at the city government, at the school board. That's what needs to be fixed, and that can be repaired. But that, and we can talk about that in the question and answer if you'd like. But that's where I found the time in a very small newsroom to take from this pot of news coverage that is largely mundane and not very well read, and put it in this pot where I'm driving impact journalism that brings readers to the Now Here enterprise. That's what's important. I will tell you that what you need to do as the newsroom, really, there's 3 things, I think. Number one, you have to support reporters and your editors and encourage them that you're behind them. If you launch on a project, you're going to be with them, and you're not going to be looking at your watch, because if you do that, you are going to add a pressure that they don't need, because they're under pressure enough to try and figure out the story. Secondly, you have to be very mindful of the legal risks for this type of reporting. And I know, boy, that seems pretty obvious and apparent. But, the Now Here enterprise, we don't have a corporate law firm. We don't have anyone but the State Press Association attorney to rely on for the most part. So that leaves it up to me as the publisher and the president of the company to make sure that if we're putting out a tough story, have I reviewed it carefully? Have I thought through this question? Can we prove what we're about to print? And by proving it, I don't mean, do we have a quote from someone saying somebody did something? Can we prove that they did what they're being accused of doing? That's absolutely essential. And in a small newsroom, when you have, sometimes green reporters, that sort of legal backstopping is really critical. But it also imposes discipline. For example, at my newsroom, I have a pretty specific fact-checking protocol that requires us to reach out to people in multiple ways to verify what we're about to publish, or to put people on clear notice that what we're going to report. Because I don't believe any subject of a story should be surprised by what they read from the Now Here enterprise. They may not like it, but they shouldn't be, if they're the subject, target, whatever phrase you want to use, if they're in the grease, so to speak, they need to know it before that publication comes out. That's part of fairness. But I've talked a lot about time management, but there's also another opportunity these days. You can borrow time. In other words, we all are seeing more and more references to collaboration in journalism, which I think is a terrific concept. There's fewer of us out there, and it is just absurd for us to continue thinking that we can all operate within our little competitive silo, and I'm not going to touch any other news organization. That opportunity to collaborate opens the door for tremendous leveraging of the resources that you have. Remember, the time, the money, the space, the office, whatever, and link it up with 1 or 2 or 3 or 10 other news organizations to exponentially expand the impact and the ability to perform investigative reporting. I would look around in your neighborhood. What other newspapers have you generally stayed away from that you might reach out and sort of negotiate an armistice? Because you both will be stronger if you both have a really potent investigative piece about the county highway department, for example. Are there broadcast outlets that cover your area that you can reach out to and partner up in ways? In Oregon, it was about a year ago, a number of news organizations, and I'm talking major broadcasts, NBC and ABC affiliates, major newspapers like the dailies in Portland and Salem and Eugene, and small weeklies like the Mount Airy Enterprise. We've joined together to do focused reporting in a week on suicide and suicide prevention in Oregon. So some of us worked together on stories, some of us did our own independent stories, and then we all put them in the basket and anyone could use anything. Wow, I got to tell you, the impact in Oregon of that collaborative approach was really substantial. People had access to far more information than they ever would have if just the Mount Airy Enterprise with its 2 reporters was trying to report on suicides among farmers. So those kind of collaborations are very powerful. But the other development that's accelerating, and if you're not open to it, you ought to be, is the flood of money going into support for local journalism. And I'm talking, look at Report for America and their support of newsrooms, large and small. I mean, the Mount Airy Enterprise, we were one of the first cohorts to get a Report for America reporter, which brought us a terrifically talented journalist from Miami. You have ProPublica with this local news network, just providing just enormous backup for local journalists to achieve the kind of journalism that we could only dream about. These opportunities are developing almost on a daily basis. Pay attention to them and don't ever assume we're too small or we really can't do that sort of work. I think the key for setting up those sorts of partnerships to bring reporting and other resources to your newsroom is give them the reason to come to you. Don't go to them with your hat in hand saying, well, we had to lay off 2 of our reporters and gee, we could really use some help. Well, thanks very much. And the conversation is going to be over. You need to have that mindset, the ambition to do great journalism, and that will get the attention of these outfits and organizations to listen to your story, to look at your application, to consider partnering with you in ways that will help establish your brand as the investigative outfit in the area. And one other thing too is, and I want to save a lot of time for questions here, but don't count readers out as a resource. Well, of course, they're a resource because they pay for the subscription, or Johnny's Meat Market is advertising his barbecue ribs. But rather count on readers to support what you want to accomplish. And at the Mount Airy Enterprise, we have a donation button on our website. We're a for-profit business. We don't have a charitable arm. We don't run contributions through some of these nonprofit organizations that are available, such as the local media association, just because I choose to keep the money local and not be seen as sort of sending local money elsewhere. But readers respond to the transparency when you say, look, we want to investigate subject X, and we need your help, and your support of our newsroom means that every dollar that you put in and support us beyond your subscription, we're going to use to go get information that you need to know. And I talked about this at the earlier session, but I want to repeat it because it's so illustrative of what's possible. I talked about this county development director, and we started having to submit public records requests under Oregon's law to get access to documents because he wouldn't talk to us, he wouldn't answer our questions. And so he figured out pretty quickly when we started filing those records requests, he thought the way he would build yet another barrier is to charge a lot of money, including legal review of public records to make sure nothing unlawful was disclosed. But he used those fees as a barrier to our access. In other words, he thought he would price us out of the market, and he came close to doing that. But what we did is we launched a campaign in our community, and we were transparent. We said, we're trying to do these investigations. The county development director wants to charge hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of fees. As your local news watchdog, we cannot afford that. We would like your help. And I started what I call dollars for disclosure. And people started sending in checks, $5, $20. We had, one check for $1,000 came in because someone was so angry that the government was trying to keep us and the public out of its business that they wanted to support that effort. Well, we get that because of the credibility we've established with our community and because we have proven ourselves with doing the watchdog work. But that also showed me that readers want to be helped. They want to be, they can provide tips, of course, and information. And we do very often, we will do call outs. Hey, we're looking at topic X. If you know anything or have information, please get in touch. But I think it gives a certain segment of our community satisfaction to know that that $20 bill I dropped off at the Mount Hero Enterprise helped get records that resulted in this story. And so don't underestimate the value of asking the community for help. And then the other opportunity that I see in every newsroom are internships. Now, you can imagine Vail, Oregon is, aging agricultural town, no theater, no clubs, one bar with about 10 stools. It is not San Francisco or St. Louis, so to speak. And 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to bring in a summer intern and see how that would work. And the University of Oklahoma sent me one of their very top journalism students who did terrific work. Well, the way we funded that is, and these are paid positions, not paid a lot, but they're paid, is that I asked the community for help. I said, if you can help support what we call the Enterprise Internship Fund, we will bring more talent to Vail for the summer. We will get you more news, and we'll help instill in these young journalists the ethics and standards that you've come to expect from the Mount Hero Enterprise. And people really react to that particular message that they've come to understand, again, because of the transparency that we invoke in doing our investigative work, that because of the distrust of the media, the idea that they could help train the next generation of journalists to do things right, by that I mean with ethical underpinnings. They write checks. The way we work it is that the Oregon Newspaper Publishers Association does have its own separate foundation, and so they act as our fiscal agent on those, so that people can get tax contributions. But I'll tell you, about a third of our intern funding comes directly in the front door. People don't care about the tax deduction; they care more about supporting this program. Well, let me tell you, last summer, I was able to fully fund by contributions from the community, by supports from the International Society of Weekly Newspaper Editors, by support of people around Oregon who appreciate what the Mount Hero Enterprise does. We had 4 paid interns, 4. And I have 4 coming again this summer. Think about that. I talked about time and you don't have any more time. Well, when you add up the 10 weeks these interns each will be with us, that's 1,600 hours of time I have to spend on journalism. Wow. That's an impact that can't be appreciated. And there's no reason that every single newsroom can't do that. When our interns come to us, one of the things I hear from them is, well, what's the future of the business? Well, let me sit down and tell you about this. I said, this is one of the most exciting times ever in journalism. We can reach more people more powerfully. We have more access to more information through databases and records than we've ever had before. You are here at a great time and an exciting time. And I tell you, the interns go through the summer and they are never looking for things to do because we're spending a lot of time asking that question, why is something happening? So consider internships. Work with your local universities, work with your community, work with state foundations that might support that sort of thing. But that's where you sort of get additional hours to do this very, very important work. And when you start doing this, readers notice. And they notice and they absorb, and then they expect. They expect this sort of performance from the Now Here enterprise. They expect us to be their watchdog. They expect us not to back down from a fight, to not let local public officials run over us. And I can tell you, we hear from the community all the time, Attaway, go get them. Thank you for doing what you do. I cannot tell you how many times we hear in the course of a week when we're doing enterprise work, thank you for what you're doing. But none of this will happen without you. It really all starts with you, whether you are the publisher or the editor or the managing editor. You have to set the tone. You have to create the expectation. You have to create the can-do attitude that we have to bust through in newsroom after newsroom, that no, this isn't optional. This is not extra duty. This is core to what we should be doing in this newsroom for this community. You need to be encouraging. You have to be the optimist. We can do this. Yeah, we're small, but we're mighty, we're skilled, and we're not letting anything stop us from doing this work. And the questions may come up, well, my staff doesn't have a clue how to do investigative reporting. Well, gosh, in this era with Zoom and webinars, the resources available for newsrooms where you don't have to send someone to a week-long national conference to learn how to do investigative reporting, but you can plug in and learn how to understand school district data. Wow, that's an incredibly potent tool to help your newsrooms gain the skills, specific skills, particularly for specific stories. There are lots of coaches and mentors available these days. Investigative Reporters and Editors has an entire coaching and mentoring program that I'm part of, that your staff can link up with someone who has experience of doing the kind of projects to get guidance at no cost. Why wouldn't you do that? Why wouldn't you armor up your staff to be able to do this kind of work instead of having them sit in a city council meeting for 3 hours being stenographers? That's not what the readers want from us. You have to be encouraging. You have to give them the freedom to sort of stumble around a little bit and not set hard deadlines, as particularly in newsrooms where this has not been a consistent part of what you do. And I think you will find that your journalism team will respond and react. At the end of the day, in my judgment, and I'm in a pretty small newsroom, there's no newsroom too small or journalist too green to be able to take on investigative reporting. It is up to you as leaders to make that call. This is what we will do. And you can do that, but more importantly, you must. And I encourage you, please do everything you can to make this part of your daily and weekly regimen in your newsrooms. With that, I'll shut up. And Betsy, let's see if there's anyone's questions, or they all fled the room screaming and they're out doing something useful.
No, we have questions. So you talked about a little bit earlier, I don't know if you used the word prioritizing when it came to covering, school board meetings and so on. So this person writes in and says, are you saying it's better to cover fewer things well than try to cover everything concisely?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I'm saying.
Okay.
Well, again, you have a finite number of hours in your news staff per week, and you look at how you're spending them, and I would rather, we in some ways Facebook gives you the excuse not to do some of the things you have done, because that's where all the refrigerator news is going, Cub Scout pack awards and that sort of thing that used to be our meat and potatoes. Well, leave that to social media, leave that to Facebook, Instagram, and do the stuff that nobody else can do.
Right. Okay. Along the same lines, it says, this person writes in and says, I agree with you, the board meetings can be a huge time suck out of a reporter's life. But in many small communities, if a reporter misses a meeting, the paper is criticized. Do you have any response to that kind of criticism? I'm looking around, the Board of Supervisors in Virginia, the chair of the board looks around and says, well, there's nobody here from the Goochland Gazette. I guess they don't care. So what do you say?
Yeah, well, I say they don't set the agenda for my newsroom any more than I set the agenda for that Board of Supervisors meetings.
Okay.
It's just that simple.
All right. Do you have regular meetings with your editorial staff to discuss and organize potential investigative stories? Do you guys come together to sort of work on that as a team or make those assignments?
I do it in a number of ways. Number one, I write pretty detailed assignment memos. Again, because I've done this for a while, and I line out, okay, here's what I want you to look at. Here's things I want you to consider. And then I'll meet with the reporter, excuse me, or reporters, and make sure they're clear on the assignment. If they have an idea, I ask them, okay, think this through, get me a memo, because that forces them to instead of sort of just chatting it out, it imposes a little bit of discipline on them to think through what it is they're doing. And then we meet regularly, whether it's by Zoom, because I work remotely a great deal, or in the newsroom. I'm constantly checking with them. Okay, well, how are we doing on that? And I'm constantly asking, so what kind of obstacles are you running into? Because that's where reporters get into trouble, is that, well, so-and-so won't call me back, or I can't get this record. Okay, well, let's think through what's the strategy? How can we get that obstacle out of the way? Instead of just saying, well, I hit this obstacle. Well, okay, let's get some dynamite and blow the obstacle out of the way and keep going. Right. So it really requires a lot of communication to keep this going, because believe me, it is very easy in any newsroom for an enterprise project to constantly slip down the list of the to-do things, because good Lord, there's that 3-alarm fire. We got to cover that. Well, okay. So it is, again, constantly keeping an eye on that, making sure that it is viewed by everybody as a priority.
Right, because I guess investigative journalism is a little less time sensitive than the 3-alarm fire. In terms of you can work on that for several weeks and uncover something, whereas the fire you probably got to go cover. You talked a little bit about staffing before, and the intern program is obviously a great idea, and they're coming there, they're getting great experience for the summer. In your last session, you talked about when you bought the paper, the reporter was a former prison guard who had no journalism experience. We're not going to go into that because I don't know what happened to the prison guard, other than you said you trained him up. But how does one recruit someone to Vail, Oregon, if one of your reporters decides to move on? I'm confident that you can train almost anybody, but how do you get them to how do you find them in Vail, Oregon, or how do you get them to move to Vail, Oregon to live, not for the summer, but potentially for a while, and work for your paper?
Well, look, it's the same. Frankly, it's the same circumstance with interns as it is for reporting candidates. I'm really candid with people about the living environment in Vail, Oregon. We're about an hour from Boise, Idaho, which is just a delightful town. The outlands of Malheur County have some spectacular, fishing and hiking, and so it's not like East St. Louis. You never want to go there. But that said, what brings people to the enterprise is that reputation what the hell is this little bitty weekly out in Oregon do? That's what's so important about the transparency. And I tell reporters, and I just had my latest hire last November moved to Vail, Oregon from Philadelphia.
Wow.
She didn't come because she just couldn't, she couldn't stand the idea of missing a summer in sagebrush. She came because what I tell my reporters and I tell my interns, I said, you're going to come here, you're going to work hard, but I'm going to coach you in all aspects of journalism so that you're prepared to move on to a bigger publication, but you're going to carry with you, I hope, the brand of the enterprise. And by that, I mean, again, the ethics and the standards. And so one of the things I do in my newsrooms through the summer for the interns, for example, and I have my regular reporters join in, is I put on in-house trainings. I will say, okay, we're going to sit down and talk about how to really do good, effective interviewing. We're going to talk about beat management. How do you manage a beat when you've got 16 other things to do? So my promise to people is that you're going to have some professional development as you help me serve this community out here.
Okay. I'm looking to see if we've got other questions. We were having a little trouble earlier having questions come in. I'm going to ask you one on my own while I wait to see if anybody else has one. What's happened with your relationship with the Daily in the county? Is that, do you guys ever collaborate? Are you still competitors? I mean, what's going on with that? Just curious.
Well, I'll be real candid with you. I mean, the Daily is pretty weak journalistically, and so I don't really consider them competitors. Number one. Number two, it's owned by the Wick family out of Arizona, and it struck me a couple of years ago. I thought this real candidate. Well, why do we have two newspapers? I mean, a daily and a weekly. When I imagined not only collaboration, but just put the two together and not cut staff, but merge the two. They've got 3 or 4 reporters. I have 2 or 3. I thought, boy, we could really show people what could happen. Well, the WIC folks weren't too keen on that idea, and so I said, well, okay, we'll stay here and keep munching away on your lunch bucket. So to answer your question, we have very little contact with the local daily, and we don't really consider them when we factor in what we're doing.
Okay, well, I assume that you have readers throughout the county. It's not like just around Vail that people read your paper throughout the county. Next,
yeah, no, we consider ourselves a countywide publication.
It's kind of personal. What's on the horizon for you? I mean, you've done a lot of things. You're very entrepreneurial in addition to being a reporter and an editor. So is there something that we should all be waiting to hear about in the next year or two from you, Les, or you got your hands full right now?
Well, I'm frankly hoping you will hear goodbye. I've been at this, like I say, for 45 years. I've been very energized the past couple of years because of the attacks on the press. That's why I stay at it. I think it's time for me to step out. I think I can still be a leader and do great journalism. But I think it's time for me to sort of exit stage left and let the next generation of people run the Malheur Enterprise or Salem Reporter. So that said, none of my friends, none of my colleagues ever believed me when I say I'm going to start thinking about actually really retiring, my wife included, because I'm always thinking, well, I'd really like to experiment with podcasts. I don't know a thing about podcasts. So yeah, the next big thing, I don't know. I'm hoping it is adios.
Okay. One question came in before I asked you that one, and we'll throw this in for the last one. You talked about the funding for the summer interns. This person wanted just a little bit more information on where you got the funding from. I think you said locally, the Press Association. What were some of the other places that were helpful in getting you summer interns? Report for America.
Yeah, they don't help with the interns. So So we have a very good relationship with the University of Oregon Journalism School, which runs a really high caliber internship program. And the university, through a fund it has, funds half of the cost of a summer intern. Well, we've been in the Snowden program for 3 years now. We had one intern, and then because of COVID last year, we wound up with two, and we have two again. So the university, through its foundation, is supporting one. The International Society of Weekly Newspapers supports half the cost of one. But then frankly, I've been in Oregon journalism, and I saw I have a fairly big voice across the state. And so I attract fairly significant funding from people around Oregon who are just intrigued by what this little paper is doing out in Vail, Oregon.
Right.
And then our local community. I had a lady mail in a $5 bill and two $1 bills for our internship program. Well, God, that $7 meant the world to me. Not because that doesn't cost cover half the hour of an intern, but the fact that she dug into her purse, you can tell by the handwriting, she was an elderly woman, to help out. I'll keep going when I see that kind of support.
Right. Well, this has been wonderful. Les has been inspirational, motivational, educational, entertaining, all of the above. He has said that we can reach out to him at any time. So one of the things we'll do is send your contact information out to everybody who has participated in this conference, probably to every registrant for not just the session, but for the whole conference, so people can get a hold of him. I plan to have VPA get a hold of him for lots of different questions we still have. But this has been wonderful. We appreciate you coming to us from your ranch in Oregon, and we look forward to talking to you again. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you all for paying any attention at all.